everyone. Happy New Year and welcome to the Legal Navigator webinar. I'm Rebecca, your host from Law Training Center. Thank you all for joining us for this session on SQE, a global pathway for international learners. So in this webinar, we'll be exploring how you can qualify as a solicitor in England and Wales through the SQE route, no matter where you are starting from and where you are in the world. Today, we are joined by two wonderful guest speakers who are currently also pursuing the SQE route. We have Fatimah Zahrah, a highly skilled paralegal based in Germany with a strong background in supporting corporate and business operations. So Fatimah is now advancing her career through the SQE. We also have Dalia Sarhan, a senior legal counsel in Switzerland with extensive experience in private practice and also in-house roles within the pharmaceutical sector. So Dalia will offer her perspective in transitioning to the SQE route and the opportunities it creates for international practitioners who are looking to dual qualify as solicitors of England and Wales. So both are outstanding examples of how the SQE is opening doors for legal professionals around the world. And they will be providing us just tips on how they're preparing, personal experiences, and also tips for success, of course. So before we get over to them, I just want to give a brief background on Law Training Center for those joining us for the very first time. So at Law Training Center, we deliver accredited professional legal training, supporting aspiring solicitors, notaries, conveyancers, probate practitioners, and paralegals. So our mission is to create alternative pathways into the legal profession, providing opportunities for everyone, regardless of their background, also that they can all achieve their goal of working within law. So we are proud to be an established provider of the SQE with the benefits of this route, which is revolutionizing just the access to the legal profession with its flexibility and affordability. So our courses are all self-paced, guided by experienced tutors and legal practitioners, and most importantly, accessible worldwide. And also through our Access Law Clinic, we also provide pro bono legal services, and we confirm qualifying work experience for the SQE as well. So what exactly is the SQE? So the SQE is a single national licensing exam introduced in September 2021. It offers a streamlined route into becoming a solicitor of England and Wales. So it eliminates the need for the traditional training contract, and it focuses on the key benefits of providing flexibility in study methods, lower cost, and the ability to complete the process internationally and more streamlined. So this would be an excellent choice for global learners. So the route for international learners, it mainly involves four main steps. So the educational prerequisites would be a degree or equivalent level 6 qualification, which can be completed overseas, and it can be in any subject area. Then you'll need to take the SQE 1 and 2 exams, so passing the SQE 1 for legal knowledge and the SQE 2 for practical legal skills. So another benefit is that the SQE 1 and SQE 2 written exams can be taken at Pearson VUE centres in the UK and worldwide. So the SRA has really made it their commitment and goal to making the qualification process accessible for aspiring solicitors globally. Then you'll need to complete qualifying work experience, so at least 2 years, which can again be obtained overseas. It does not have to be English and Welsh law, providing you are in an environment where you are getting legal services and it's signed off by a solicitor of England and Wales or a legal compliance officer of legal practice in England and Wales. That will count towards your qualifying work experience. Then last but not least, pass the SRA's character and suitability test. It's worth noting that steps 1 to 3 can be completed in any order, just offering, again, great flexibility. So why would you want to qualify for the SQE route? The SQE honestly offers numerous advantages. For example, global recognition. So solicitors' qualification is respected worldwide. You have flexible career options, so you can work in law firms, in-house, like our guest speakers today, work part of government, or even establish your own practice as well. It's also an affordable pathway in comparison to the more traditional routes. It is the more cost-effective option. And then lastly, just international opportunities. It opens the doors to working with global clients. But that's enough of me today. You will now hear from our amazing guest speakers who will provide more of an insight and information into their SQE journey. So it will be great if you could both just start off by sharing with our audience today just a bit more about your background and why you decided to pursue a career in law. So if we can start with Fatimah, that would be great if you could just introduce yourself and tell our audience a bit more about you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good evening. So my name is Fatima, and I started my law journey because I believe that I have to do something more with my life rather than just being a sales manager. I wanted to diversify into law because I believe I had a passion for it. However, I did not realize the passion fully until I started actually studying for it, which got me interested. And then obviously, I realized that there are different pathways to qualify as a lawyer. And one would be through the barrister route, one could be the solicitor route. And depending if you're talking about UK or it could be, let's say, New York bar exam, if you wanted to qualify internationally, which I wanted to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Dalia, is it all right if you can just introduce yourself as well and just give them a brief background on yourself?
Okay, I'm happy to do that. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining. I have a little bit of a different background. I am already qualified. I am an Egyptian qualified lawyer. I studied law in Egypt. I also have a PhD from there. My career spans over different areas. I've worked in-house. I've worked in private practice. I've also worked in the government, in academia, and I've worked in 3 different countries. I've worked in Egypt, in Dubai, and in Switzerland. For the last 10 years or a little bit more, I've been working in-house in the pharmaceutical industry, covering roles as a country and regional lawyer, covering most of the Middle East and North Africa countries. And then as of 2019, I moved to Switzerland, to headquarters of Novartis, to work as a product lawyer to support the launch of some of Novartis' key assets. So that's a little bit about my background. Happy to talk about any bit in more detail.
Wonderful. Thank you both. So if I could just start with you, Fatima, could you just explain why specifically? Because you mentioned earlier that, there were different pathways, like the barrister route, for example, you brought up. But why specifically did you choose the SQE route to become a solicitor, and how does it specifically align with your career goals?
So I feel that while becoming a solicitor, also it is very important to earn a living. And considering I was already into 7 years of my corporate career, I would say it was like the practical choice to make and more pragmatic choice. And also the traditional need for having training contracts is kind of eliminated, and you can get the qualifying work experience signed off by a solicitor or an equivalent body is something which really intrigued me about this pathway. So instead of being a barrister, I thought that the SQE route is better. Right. And also I did some research on, I would say, the pay scales of solicitors who are practicing out of the UAE, in fact, entire Middle East. And also I searched because I was relocating to Germany. So I researched whether there is any particular advantages that qualified UK solicitors have while operating in Germany. And I realized that, yes, we can get a foreign legal qualifications recognized here in Germany, which is, of course, a very different country. And you need to know like C2 level of German to be a practicing lawyer here, and which was, of course, a different language. But I realized that even if you have a UK law background, you can earn better living here and also in the Middle East by studying for the solicitor's exam instead of taking the other route, which could have been the barrister route.
Yeah. So definitely is more like just a more streamlined and accessible path.
Yeah.
So Dalia, you're obviously starting off at a different sort of pathway, being that you're actually a qualified lawyer. So what specifically want to make you to dual qualify and become a solicitor of England and Wales?
Well, I think a lot of the stuff has already been mentioned, but let me emphasize some of it. Well, the SQE offers you the route to get an internationally recognized qualification that is prestigious and very well regarded, not just in the UK, but internationally. And this opens doors for you, and if you want to become more competitive internationally, and also considering the role that English law plays in a lot of the international contracts, international disputes, being qualified in English law gives you a lot more credibility when you're working on cross-border matters. So given that I'm already kind of working in the international space, it gives me a competitive edge. It gives me more credibility to obtain such a qualification. The other thing, of course, that it is a more inclusive system. It's a more streamlined system. It's more open to recognizing the experience of internationally qualified lawyers and also the work experience that you have obtained in other jurisdictions, not just in the UK. So I think this was very attractive for me in that sense. Add to that, of course, the flexibility of being able to work. I do work full-time as a lawyer, and to be able to obtain that without having to relocate to the UK immediately, or also having to be able to study for it through online courses at my own pace, in my own time. So that was also kind of fits more with my schedule and my lifestyle to be able to do that. So again, in short, it's a more accessible, more streamlined, more inclusive route than other routes. And it's also cost effective and flexible, and still gives me the prestigious, qualification that opens doors for me internationally.
Great. Thank you so much, Dalia. It's good that you touched on the point of the flexibility and also managing your studies as well, because balancing a demand in career and studying as well can be particularly tough. So it'd be quite good to just know, how specifically did you manage your time and stay focused on studying as well?
So I'm still going through it, and I have to say, everybody has a different, recipe that works for them. For me, it's always kind of staying connected and doing something, anything every day, a little bit every day. So it's just kind of, I commute to work, for example, using my commute, which is usually at that time to study and go through my materials, using a lot of the online lectures to listen to them, for example, during my commute, using the studying as a way to disconnect also from work, because it's also very interesting. It's not all boring. A lot of it is actually interesting. So it's actually fun to focus on something else other than your day-to-day job. So I have to say, it's not always easy. I'll be lying if I said it's a breeze and I, manage to do it always. There are times when I'm very committed and I can stick to my schedule. But I've learned to forgive myself a little bit when it doesn't work. And I've learned to put realistic expectations of what I can achieve. There are weekends when I can do a couple of hours. There are weekends when I have things that I have to do with my family. There's also ups and downs at work. There's also travel at work. So, again, setting realistic expectations, just staying on the topics, and also being kind to yourself.
Yeah, that's really good. What about you, Fatima? How has your experience been so far, especially when it comes to managing your time and, focusing on your course as well?
The fact that we have an online portal and everything is available and accessible even on the mobile devices, like Dalia said, it comes easy. So, but there have been days where I have actually planned and studied different modules of it. And I would suggest the modules that, say, if somebody already has some prior knowledge of the law, let's say somebody likes contract law, for instance, then they could take up modules related to that first, so they become a bit more comfortable about the curriculum. So I would suggest, let's say, if lawyers who are already working in, even as paralegals, they could take up business law and practice as a module first just to intrigue their interest. So, or you could probably take a totally different approach, and let's say you can go for studying a totally different module. But I did this when I was preparing that I tried to stick to the modules that I somehow already have some knowledge of, just to build it up. And also, I believe planning is necessarily important. I feel that the planning that you do for yourself into smaller goals, it should be divided into smaller goals, and then you should try and stick to them no matter what. Otherwise, you can end up losing track. So I believe that necessarily going forward, I'll have to be a better planner, I would say. However, in terms of support from the Law Training Center, I would say that it was quite easy to get support. Either way, it's a fully interactive platform. So, and then the staff of Law Training Center very interactive when it comes to emails, and they have prompt responses. We have quick access to teachers if you do not understand. Then we have weekly workshops of modules that they have decided every week. So somehow I would say that within a period of, let's say, 2 months, you're able to revise every module at least once. And they are basically based on sample questions that we have for that particular modules. That also helps a lot, especially when the exam pressure is intense. So yeah, I think better planning, and then of course using the platform first, knowing the advantages of the platform and then using it fully. I think it would make it more accessible for everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's good that
Yeah.
you touched on the resources and the study methods as well. So just going to throw it over to you, Dalia, as well. What study methods and resources have worked best for you so far?
So, I mean, I would have to kind of maybe repeat a little bit of what Fatima said. I think the platform is quite useful. I usually start with like listening to the lecture, and then I start looking at the written material, and then I'm old fashioned, so I like printing things. So I print them so that I can highlight a little bit and do my own comments on the side, which helps things stick a little bit more. And then once I've done that, I'll do the questions. And then I kind of reward myself if I get everything right. So that's kind of my method a little bit. And then once I've finished like a whole topic, I'll try to go through the whole thing and then do the questions for the whole topic, which again is, I find some people prefer to start with the written stuff and then listen to the lecture. It really depends. But again, the platform is very helpful that we have at Law Training Center. And again, it depends what works for you. For me, that's what worked best for me.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it, just the flexibility that you can tailor it to your learning style. There's no one shoe fits all. Whatever works for you the best, you can adapt it to your style. But what I'm curious to know is just how, for both of you, how your experience with different legal systems has helped you prepare for the SQE. I don't know if you wanted to start with that, Dalia.
I'm happy to do that. I mean, I have a bit of an advantage that I'm not new to English law. So even at university, I had a bit of an English law. So I did a dual study in Arabic and English, a lot of which was English law. So some of the subject matter was not completely new to me. I also have an LLM from the American University in Cairo, which was completely also common law. So it's not something, it wasn't like I'm seeing the, case law system for the first time or, so I did, I do have an academic background, including kind of a PhD. So I'm not completely unfamiliar with that sort of subject matter, including like the comparative stuff. Like my PhD was completely based on a comparison with English law. So I kind of was exposed to it before. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're working internationally, chances are you have been exposed a lot to English law because it is the governing law of a lot of the international contracts, of a lot of your international disputes. So you kind of find yourself exposed to that. That's actually what motivated me to formalize that relationship a little bit more.
Oh, that's wonderful. So I don't know, Fatima, if you could give like any sort of advice for people who don't exactly come from any sort of legal background or any sort of information on English law. How can they go about getting started, or what advice would you give to them?
I would just build up on a little what Dalia said. And of course, she enjoys, mashallah, this idea that she studied and qualified. She got exposure very early on to English law as well as Arabic law. For me, of course, studying for the UK law, my LLB from University of London, and I had, of course, zero exposure to Arabic law, I would say. However, I really enjoyed this idea that I got to study Islamic law as part of an elective module that I selected. And obviously, I learned the 7 foundations, the legal foundations that we have in the UK, such as contract and tort law. And it did help me a lot to make up my mind for the SQE when I saw that most of the modules are somehow linked to all those 7 legal foundations. And that was also one of the factors. And as far as English law is concerned, I think my experience of living and working in Dubai, it gave me that confidence over time, of course, when I realized that English law is directly applicable by certain offshore courts in the UAE. And while somebody could be a critique and say, somebody could be skeptic and say it's not completely applicable or it's up to the discretion of the court. However, when we look at let's say the ADGM regulations, they are quite based on the English law and necessarily they have a mechanism of adopting foreign UK judgments as well. So learning about all of this was quite intriguing for me while working there. And also realizing that any competent, because I was new to law, of course, I changed career from MBA, or I would say simply marketing and sales, to law. It took me some time to understand how it worked on the ground. But what I felt was that regardless of the reasons, one of the most chosen law, as a choice of law and contracts was law of England and Wales. So I thought because we actually get to study a lot, instead of just learning advocacy skills, we actually get to study the law in depth as well. And then, of course, we learn the advocacy skills, practical skills through the MCQs, which have real life problems. So this is the idea that I like behind SQE. And to move on to your question for the flexibility part, see, I feel that it's upon the person to actually keep themselves to the idea of flexibility as well. So let's say if somebody, for whatever reasons, have not been able to study for, let's say, 3 months in a row, then they should try and plan better and then divide it into smaller parts, delay taking the exam if they have to, but they should prepare well so that they qualify the first time round. And I believe the system that we have online, where we have different modules and then we have practice questions as well, especially the new course that they have designed, where they have specific MCQs related to specific topics. I think that is also very helpful. So let's say if someday I do not want to, I could take a different approach and say, if let's say someday I do not want to read a book, I can simply attempt the MCQs, even if I fail at all of them. At least next time round, I will be able to tackle those problems. If not in the exam, then in real life, I learned something out of it. So I think practicing the MCQs is also very important without having this idea in mind whether I need to actually score them all correct or no. And let's say sometimes when I'm curious, I do attempt MCQs without reading a topic. So just to understand whether I do know anything basic about a particular topic or not as well. And then, yes, if I do get a reasonable score, I would say, and by reasonable, of course, I would mean the balance in the UK course, which is quite high, the burden of balance, by reasonableness. Let's say if I get, let's say, 6 out of 10 correct, then of course I would like to reward myself as well. Yeah.
And that's brilliant. So what skills would you say that international candidates should focus on to succeed in the SQE?
Yeah, so even a candidate who does not intend to practice law in the UK, yet wants to have a go at the SQE and attempt it and somehow qualify as a solicitor, and let's say the person is practicing in a civil law jurisdiction, not even a common law jurisdiction, I think one thing is very important, that is to have strong nerves. And one must be a good listener to have strong nerves. This is what I have realized over time. And somebody who has, I wouldn't say lower, but who has lesser listening capabilities, I think they cannot be a good lawyer, no matter how much of the law they know by heart. And as far as overall I feel overall career progression is concerned, I think you have to wait for the right opportunity, and you have to meanwhile build up yourself for the right opportunity constantly. So SQE could be just one goal. It does not have to be the goal of your life. This is what I've realized. So the paths are endless. And of course, because SQE somehow, because you get to study 19 different modules. So basically, a student would get to study approximately everything that possibly they can, or they could go to, they could end up in any kind of law firm dealing with any kind of issues in particular as a specialist firm. Let's say somebody who is just fond of criminal law might end up working as licensed conveyancer, or could end up working in, let's say, wills and probate, which probably they never liked. So, but SQ is something which would give you that edge of being an all-rounder over time, the learnings you get from the SQE.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. So, Dalia, what advice would you give to somebody if they're asking what would be the important skills that they should focus on in order to succeed for the SQE? So, if we say professionally, what skills do you think would be valuable?
I think there's two things. I think Fatima touched a lot upon like professional skill and the fact that it is an inclusive route. Means that you can come at it from different directions. And a lot of the experience and in the multiple, if you look at all the people that I know that are attempting this, there are some who are already qualified, who are in-house. There are some who have no legal background. So I think you can come at it from different aspects, and it does open so many doors for you. Just going to touch upon again what I've said on the role that English law plays internationally. So yes, you could end up, of course, working in the more traditional legal roles in the UK, but there's a lot that's happening in the world where this, the door is open for you to start something, especially, and maybe I build on what Fatima said, in the parts of the world that are commercial hubs, such as Dubai, Singapore, Hong Kong, and so on. These are areas where English law plays such an, important role and has such a high influence that, this is something else that you could be doing. And again, if you're already doing it, like, for example, in my case, I've worked in Dubai, I've worked internationally. That has helped me a little bit to go in that direction. But the one thing I want to mention on preparing for the SQE as well is the material is, for me, it feels like going back to law school. So it's interesting. You can do it. It's not that difficult to understand it, most of it. I think part of the preparation is preparing for the exam itself as well, because you could also know the material very well, but not test well because you don't understand how the test is going. And I said earlier that I reward myself when I get the questions right, because some of those questions are very tricky. So it's important that you also familiarize yourself with how the questions are being asked, because in many cases it's very similar and it's just nuances. So a big part of the preparation is kind of learning to see those nuances. And also, if you don't get it right the first time, it's not because you don't understand the material. It's probably because you still don't know how to answer the questions. So don't be too demotivated. So I think this is a big part of the preparation as well. On the one hand, I think a lot of ways professionally can prepare you to understand that kind of material, depending on what your background is, but also focus on preparing for the exam itself.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for touching on the preparation of the exams. But you also touched on something else I think was quite important when you mentioned about just the opportunities that it opens up, and it's not necessarily just restricted just to the traditional sort of occupation that you can get in a law firm as a standard solicitor. So I'm just curious to know, how has the SQE impacted your work as a legal professional in a global organization like Novartis?
So as if I'm still going through it. So it's definitely and I'm just going to reiterate what I said earlier around just getting this internationally recognized, prestigious qualification that gives you a more competitive edge if you wanted to move ahead with your career. So if you want, just to advance it further, It puts you at the same footing with people who have similar qualifications, and makes you a little bit more competitive in that sense. In addition, as I said, there will be instances where you are advising on cross-border matters, especially if you are working at a working headquarters. Getting a qualification in English law just makes you more credible. And I work on a lot of licensing deals. I work on a lot of big transactions. A lot of this is English law. Most of it actually is English law. So if you are qualified in this system, it just gives you this credibility and this mark of high quality.
Thank you. Again, Fatima, you're also in a non-traditional role as well, working within the energy sector. It would just be interesting to get from your perspective, how do you see the SQE helping lawyers address global issues like sustainability and digitalization?
Yeah. So, as relatively, I would say, as a relatively younger lawyer who's right now unqualified, but I would say it does open up doors for you. And the first door it opens up for you in your career, in your roles, and you get the ability to question it as facts. You get the ability to question, and over the time you refine your questions. So I feel studying for the SQE as well as currently doing an LLM, I think the combination together, it has actually somehow made me more aware that we need to question whatever is, let's say there's a contract, one must question why this particular clause is there. Or maybe just a template was followed, that is why it is there. And if I believe even as paralegals or even as legal assistants, you should have that ability. Otherwise, you are unable to make a conversation, let alone any impact in your day-to-day work. And I would translate that to personal life as well. If somebody is not, there's a trend of lawyers somehow realizing this late or calling out for it, that lawyers should be more commercially aware. I believe that everyone should be more legally aware as well. And this is what I have realized by preparing for the SQE and then later on being a candidate for an LLM degree here in Germany. Also, I feel that English law somehow, I'm not trying to say that any other law is, of course, below or above English law, but I'm just saying it has a special place in my heart because that is how I started studying law. So my view could be biased. However, I feel that it does help you to understand the basics. Okay. And the idea, the principle of stare decisis in English law, that lower courts will respect the judgment of or consider it as a persuasive authority when there's a higher court judgment. I feel this idea is very compelling. And it is also like kind of maintaining the, I would say, the legacy of having a judicial organ of the state anyway. So there are many other concepts that I can touch upon, but I feel there are many, many principles in English law which are actually adopted by many other states, although they wouldn't say it, or perhaps they have just adopted it, assimilated it, without even knowing that they have assimilated it. And this is not limited to, let's say, Commonwealth countries or only, for instance, countries which are, I would say, economically more opened up. I would say even in the UAE, many rules from the English law have been adopted, and not just in the free zone. Many similar articles in the GDPR and in the data protection law of UK and UAE. So when I started studying for the SQE and while working in the UAE, I realized that there are quite similarities, but then all of them somehow come down to English law. And that was quite intriguing. And then I realized that not just, I would say, as something, of course, it has prestige attached to it, the SQE route. It has, of course, this promise of career progression attached to it. I believe it's more to do with how inspired you are to study it, because you know why it matters. I think this is what I realized while working in the UAE and studying here in Germany now, that yes, English law will always hold. But then it would be very difficult if somebody has not actually studied English law, English public law, I would say, as a module, to understand why UK does not have a codified constitution per se, right? So unless you study it, you cannot know. And because I've studied it and I've studied it well so far, I realized the importance for it. And when I realized the importance, for instance, for this meager thing, which people will think that it's a meager thing while UK does not have a codified constitution, I would like to say studying for the SQE and public law and LLB from the University of London, it made me realize that what are the reasons behind it? Like parliamentary sovereignty could be one. And whether constitution necessarily has to be a book of fundamental rights, or it could be parliament protecting your fundamental rights and other organs of state. So, and the principles, the basic principles, which are democracy and rule of law. So I believe no matter which background you come from, if you actually necessarily study English law, it broadens your horizon of thinking in general. And of course, SQE, I would say it does broaden your horizon of thinking, but then it sometimes does give you a headache as well. So I would suggest to especially learners who are new to it or they're not from an English law background, I would suggest they should start with the basics first and overall then build themselves the way up, towards the way up. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Fatima. There's another important aspect, because of course studying is very significant, but another thing to take into consideration is the qualifying work experience element. So if you could just give any sort of advice on what steps can international learners take to secure QWE opportunities, particularly if they are outside of the UK?
Yeah. So outside of the UK, I would suggest try to gain some kind of legal work experience. It does not necessarily has to be a paralegal role or has to be, let's say, a legal assistant role. It could be even a legal secretary role, even a receptionist role in a law firm. Start somewhere. So I'll tell you something. A person must have the ability to start somewhere if they want to become a good lawyer, no matter what the jurisdiction or the law they study. This is what I believe in. So once you get your foot in the door, then of course, and you take your role seriously, you get to learn stuff which will help you gain experience. And of course, we have this method whereby a solicitor can sign off on your prior work experience if you have similar work experience. It does not necessarily have to be a hardcore litigation thing, or it does not necessarily have to be, let's say, an arbitration thing, or it could be a mix of both. So this thing is also, by the way, very intriguing about SQE, that we have the option of getting signed off by solicitors to have 2 years qualifying work experience, because I assume finding a training contract is very, very difficult, especially if we have jurisdictions where there aren't many law firms contracts. So to have an edge over the rest, and just to begin to having that edge, one should be flexible to gain some work experience.
Great. Thank you, Fatima. So I know, Dalia, you're slightly coming in at a different sort of place, as you're already a qualified practitioner, so you have your QWE, but it would be quite good to know what your advice would be to international learners on how to secure QWE opportunities abroad.
Well, I think one of the main reasons, and you've mentioned that I've actually chosen to go down that, or to go for the SQE, is that it's inclusive and it, recognizes the work experience that I've done as a qualified lawyer. But as I said, there is the inclusivity of the SQE also, and the fact that you can gain qualifying work experience, in multiple areas. That's also one very big advantage. And, to Fatima's point, it's not just law firms. There's also, I'm working in-house. We do a lot of very complicated work that, sometimes, people who are studying for law don't really have an idea of what lawyers in-house do. And they may think that we kind of send everything to external counsel. That is not the case. There's a work that is done in-house. And so if you start somewhere, to work in-house, even as a trainee, I know, for example, that in when we have trainees at headquarters in Novartis, we get a lot of lawyers who haven't qualified. Most of them will qualify in Switzerland, but we get a lot of trainees that spend 6 months with us, for example, and we usually give them very interesting work that is not just, work that you would do if you were, give them work that a qualified lawyer would do to have them, gain the experience. I'm sure there are other opportunities in-house or in law firms to start there somewhere. And, I guess the other stuff have been mentioned by Fatimah.
Wonderful. So what roles do you think networking and building professional connections play in succeeding as an international learner in the legal field?
Well, I think, there's of course gaining qualifying work experience, and the more connections you have, the more likely you'll be able to secure qualifying work experience, but also actually securing also once you've qualified. I mean, qualifying is just a step on the way. So I think if you're planning to have an international career, I suppose you are already starting to build your network now. You're not starting to build your network once you've qualified. So I think it's very important that these things go hand in hand, that you start, and there are many ways to network and build your network, and there's a wide spectrum of things you can do, starting from just attending even events by law firms. That opens the doors. I mean, you can go, you listen about developments in law, you get to know the lawyers that work there, you get to know the partners. That's easy, actually. That's easy because sometimes people hear, oh, networking is very hard. Where do I start? There's actually, a lot of that. There's this, start by going to an event, and then move across the spectrum. You can then start joining an association, just joining something, and then being more active. That there's actually no excuse to start today, to join a learners group. And then, the people who are learning are they're all future lawyers. So I'm a big fan of networking with the SQE or without. And I think networking has helped me throughout my career. And I feel like I have to set up time for networking almost regularly, even now, and even across in an organization. And I think, and that's, there's so many benefits from there. So starting from, building your own knowledge, getting a perspective from others as well. Not just your own perspective on things. And then, to kind of even being able to secure opportunities. So even if you cannot secure a concrete opportunity through networking, the perspective that you get through talking to professionals really helps you build your own skills and trying to figure out what you want to do yourself.
Yeah, very good. So what challenges do you think international learners might face in securing QWE or networking, and how can they overcome them?
Specifically, with regards to qualifying work experience, as I said, I'm in a different position, and maybe not the most appropriate person to comment on that. But I do understand that in certain, going back to Fatimah, if I think, for example, when I started my career in Egypt, that has evolved a lot. There's a lot of interesting, but even then when I did, there was a lot of interesting work. So maybe I was not working at an international law firm, but we worked as local counsel for international law firms when they were doing deals in Egypt. So that's one way to getting exposed to international transactions when you act as local counsel. So on the one hand, it may be difficult in certain jurisdiction where you say, okay, but there are no internationally recognized law firms in that jurisdiction, or there are no, in most places there is always something, but if international work. So that's maybe one way of overcoming this challenge. And in terms of networking, again, I think, especially after the pandemic, and I'm not saying online replaces everything, but there is so much that you can do online through networks that exist now online. There's the Association of Corporate Counsel. There's so much that you could join, even if you are not based in a jurisdiction where you have direct access to people who are working internationally. And then once you get to know the people, you start trying to see how can I build on this. So that's maybe a few tips for learners who are in jurisdictions where there is not this international environment.
Okay, thank you so much, Dalia. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Fatimah.
Yes, I would like to add this thing so there are two things. One thing about the QW, like I said, we should be open to, let's say, if somebody is based, so I'm based in Germany now, and if I, let's say, want to work for a law firm here, I should not restrict myself to, let's say, only the top tier international firms or only to working in-house. I should be open to all opportunities, because if I still need to, let's say, get the QWE qualified, right? So, and also the title should not matter much for somebody who is starting their career in law. And for the networking, I would like to mention here that I think attending conferences is very effective. So attending conferences is one thing that you can do to professionally network around. And actually, you do learn a lot by going to the conferences. Recently, I had the opportunity to go to an IPR conference in Dubai, and before going there, I didn't know probably what's the difference between, let's say, trademark and trade secret or copyright, the proper differences between the three terms. And I got to make new connections there, like-minded people, also people studying SQE or studying for so, and I got to learn many tips from there, not just for professional careers, but also, let's say, study tips. And so I feel conferences is a good idea to participate into. Also, effectively using LinkedIn is very important. Talking about the posts, talking about the topics that interest you or somehow have potential link to your career is also a good option. And following the relevant pages on LinkedIn, and of course, engaging with the post is also a good idea. However, I feel somehow I could be traditional minded when I say this, but I feel the human connection element is better. And I recommend for meeting people, you will end up listening. If you can participate actively in a conference, at least as a learner, as an international learner especially, it's very important that you get to meet people and know, even if you get to know two basic concepts out of a 2-day conference, I think it's worth going, because somehow those concepts you will be able to use somewhere, maybe in a different country. You never know. So this happened to me back in Dubai. I attended a conference for intellectual property rights. And here in Germany, I was invited to an event, and I could actually speak about intellectual property, whatever I learned in that conference here in Germany, when we had the networking session.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Fatimah. So what advice would you both give to those who are currently just contemplating whether they want to start the SQE from abroad and they don't know where to start? What would be your advice? If we just start with you, Dalia.
We've touched upon a lot of the benefits of the SQE. And I think if you're thinking about it, think about how inclusive it is, and also the flexibility. You don't have to stop whatever you're doing. If you have a career, you can continue pursuing that career. You don't have to relocate. These are a lot of benefits that I think if you're kind of like on the fence, do I do it? Do I not do it? I would suggest to start. It's also, as we mentioned earlier, a more cost-effective option compared to other options that for other qualifications. So I would say there's just so much benefits in there, and just, I suppose, little to lose to kind of like take the decision and go ahead and try. And it's also something you can do in your own pace. So if you can finish the SQE 1 and then then start the SQE 2. There's not a very specific order. So again, and the fact that the work, and we've talked quite a bit about qualifying work experience, the fact that the work you're doing now is not meaningless is something that you can use towards it. So I think this is particularly, certainly in my case, these were some of the things that have made me helped me make the decision. So I would just say go for it.
Thank you so much, Dalia. And Fatimah, what would be your advice for those who are considering the SQE?
My advice to them would be to definitely plan better and make sure that they go through all the written notes that they have access to and attempt as many questions as possible. Because I believe that, like Dalia said earlier, it's important to read the written material as well, but actually preparing for the exam, and also the more MCQs you attempt, I think it makes your nerves stronger to deal with them. Because sometimes earlier learners have reported that some MCQs somehow came totally out of syllabus. And I feel that one should prepare better, and because they would never put up any question in the exam which is technically out of syllabus to say, but they could be a little tricky. So to avoid losing out marks on those questions, it is better to prepare the topic not just in a wholesome manner, but also through an exam point of view, which is by practicing more.
Wonderful. I think that's sums that up for today, then. Thank you so much, both of you, for your incredible insights, and thank you all for joining this webinar. If you would like to discuss your SQE journey further, feel free to contact us by email. So you can send us an email to info@ltckent.co.uk, or you can visit our website for more information. So that's ltckent.co.uk. Thank you once again for joining us, and again, special thanks to our guest speakers, and we look forward to supporting your success. Thank you.